Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Massive Breakdown Podcast, episode 54. We are going to be coming to you tonight, bringing you a pretty cool idea that we thought of a little bit earlier. We're basically calling this the Hypothetical episode. And I know we're kind of in that weird dead space in between the end of the Destiny 2 console beta and the beginning of the Destiny 2 PC beta and the Destiny 2 release. And so what we'd like to do tonight is we're going to take a look at what we think Destiny 2 is going to shape out like PvP-wise when it releases. We're going to go into hypotheticals. We're going to talk about the hypothetical meta, some basic changes we think that we're going to see when Destiny 2 comes out. We're going to talk about how we would play the game if Destiny 2 were going to release tomorrow with the changes that we're going to talk about. So it's really just going to be a fun little exercise in theory crafting, I guess is what you could call it. In theory crafting what the Destiny 2 meta is going to look like very, very quickly after the game releases. With Destiny 1, it was a weird thing because nobody really knew what was going on when it first released. So the meta took a really long time to shape out, but we saw that as the game progressed, metas came more and more quickly, and they solidified very, very rapidly after patches, and I think Destiny 2 is going to be the same way. So what we're going to try to do is play some hypothetical mind games, get you guys a head start on what the meta is going to be, or at least what we think it might be. The only guns I was disappointed with, hand cannons ever so slightly. I thought they were almost in a good place. I would have maybe upped the damage a teeny tiny amount to where the adaptive archetype could kill in 1 crit and 3 bodies against full armor, because I feel like they brought down that damage too much, and that combined with the other things they did to the hand cannons made them still useful, but they didn't feel as good to play with. And part of what has made Destiny special is all the guns feel good to play with in their given range. Auto rifles feel good up close. Scout rifles feel good long range. Pulse rifles feel good at mid-range. And the way hand cannons have always worked for me is hand cannons don't feel as good as autos at close range, but they feel better than autos at mid-range. They don't feel as good as pulse rifles at mid-range, but they feel better than pulse rifles at close range, you know? They're kind of like, they're not purely the best, or in my mind, they weren't purely supposed to be the best, but they were supposed to be kind of like that middle of the road, it's more of a jack-of-all-trades option. I didn't necessarily get that feeling. I still used them. A hand cannon was still one of my 2 preferred primaries in almost every loadout. But I just felt like they could have been a little bit better. Now, we got to be careful because we obviously saw hand cannons become meta very, very quickly in Destiny 1. And at certain points, I would consider them broken. So a small, tiny buff, maybe 1 or 2 points of damage to bring them out of the 2 crit 2 body into 1 crit 3 body range. Doesn't make the time to kill any faster. Maybe add a little bit of aim assist back in there. Damage fall off wise, I thought was pretty okay. You know, I would maybe tinker with those 2 values just a super tiny amount in the buff direction.
Yeah, I'm honestly hesitant to hope that they buff hand cannons. Well, I do love the kind of the hand cannon fantasy in Destiny, kind of that lone gunslinger killing aliens with his trusty 6-shooter. At the same time, I am concerned about game balance, and hand cannons by their nature, because they do a fair chunk of damage on a single shot, and they do allow you to make really good use of cover and aerial play and other things that high skill players are going to be able to take full advantage of, do find themselves in kind of a fine line in the meta, and I think it's really easy to take them too far one direction or the other. And obviously in Destiny 1 it was really hard for Bungie to find a way to back them up to not being just the best overall option once you got to a certain skill level. So I hear where you're coming from, but I'm hesitant to say that they will change anything. I think hand cannons probably will not get changed before launch. I think that's something they will probably leave alone. That's my prediction in this case.
Well, hand cannons in Destiny 1 were so good because if you wanted to play with any type of aerial accuracy at all, you had to use them.
Yep.
On top of that, they were extremely forgiving in terms of their aim assist. Like, you could just spam shots, and since you only needed 1 headshot and 2 bodies, you were pretty much guaranteed to get that just by spamming. They attempted to neuter that by crushing the damage fall off, which I thought was a poor choice. what I would have done is I would have taken down the aim assist, and that was it. Left it alone. I would have made them truly, truly, truly a high skill weapon that you had to be pinpoint accurate with to use. That was where I thought the hand cannon fantasy should have gone. Should have been less forgiving, but more rewarding. They instead went the opposite way. They made it, they kept it very forgiving, and they made it a little bit less rewarding. I didn't think that was a good way to go. In Destiny 2, they've kind of done a little bit of both. Yeah. They're now less rewarding and also less forgiving. And I think it's a bit of overkill. I don't think it was necessary, especially considering autos are actually very good in this game. Pulse rifles are actually very good in this game. Scouts, we didn't really have a scout map, but I think when we do have a scout map, scouts will be good in this game. I just felt like hand cannons kind of got left out a small bit.
I think so, and this was just my experience, obviously. One anecdotal report among an ocean of them. I found success with hand cannons was as kind of a niche tool for flanking enemies. I did not find success in 1v1 duels with any other weapon, essentially, except maybe a scout or somebody trying to use a sidearm who was too far away. But they definitely lost straight up to pulse rifles and auto rifles, and maybe they should, It depends on what Bungie is really trying to do with them. But I did find that they were very good for flanking, especially, on the one map that we had, flanking B using the cover there. It made it difficult. Better Devils made it difficult, I think, for people to tell where they were getting hit from. So, I hear where you're coming from, and I certainly wouldn't complain about a little extra damage, making them a little bit more forgiving. It took me a little bit to adapt to the idea that I had to land 2 headshots and 2 body shots. So if anything, I hope that they do, like you say, and they just bump the damage up a little bit. I do hope that they don't take the aim assist back up, because as much as I love hand cannons, I felt like when I was landing my shots, I felt like good, like, hey, I'm actually aiming. Whereas a lot of times when I'm playing with the palindrome, I feel like, oh, I landed another headshot. I wasn't really trying. Like you said, it's so forgiving. It's just sort of easy. And so I do think that they hit the aim assist, or they put the aim assist into a better spot here in terms of when you land the crit, it's because you actually earned it. You actually, your reticle was on that person's head.
Yeah. You want to feel like a gunfighter, not someone who's just spamming a weapon.
Yeah.
That's what the last word fantasy was for, and the last word, was that. And that's kind of what sidearms are for. Like, sidearms are not taking your time lining up shots. To me, the hand cannon has always, or it should have been, about taking your time and lining up your shots. It became it moved away from that in Destiny. I think they're kind of unsure, because we all know way, way, way back in Destiny 1, before they even released it, hand cannons were a special weapon. They weren't a primary. There were 3 primaries, and then it was one of the specials. And I think they've never really found the exact spot they want to put them in, and it's very hard to balance. Yeah. Auto rifles have a clear-cut role. They are close-range weapons. And I know a lot of people are very upset that auto rifles kill the fastest in the game. They have the fastest time to kill. But what you have to understand is, and I hate this argument, but people say that auto rifles are low-skill weapons. Low-skill weapons. They are, by their nature, more forgiving of close-range engagements, and that is it. Auto rifles suck at mid-range. They're useless at long range. And not only are they only good at close range, but you have to maintain that line of sight the entire time, which another person does not have to if they're using a hand cannon, right? That's very, very dangerous against high-level opponents. Auto rifles are good in one given situation, and they very quickly become outclassed by players who know how to play against them. Auto rifles should kill the fastest in that one situation, because otherwise we run into what we ran into in Destiny 1, which is they're totally useless.
Yep.
If an auto rifle kills slower than every other gun in the game, nobody except for the worst players out there will ever use them. And you do not want a gun that is only used by the worst players out there. That is not a good gun to have in a game.
Yeah, it's I mean it's too bad. There are a lot of auto rifles I really liked in Destiny 1, but they don't compete. And I was really happy with the way that auto rifles felt in the Destiny 2 beta. I don't know if there were any significant changes from the reveal event. I predict they're going to leave auto rifles alone at Destiny 2 launch. I don't think they'll make any changes to the weapons that we saw.
They messed with the UI rate of fires on the auto rifles. I don't think they actually physically changed the rate of fires. At least I couldn't tell that they did. They changed the UIs for rate of fires a lot. Deathstalker was a 900 RPM gun. It was 720 in the beta. Risk Runner was 720 at Destiny reveal event. It was 900 in the beta. They had one gun, the high impact ones were I think listed at 360, and now they're 450. So...
Well, and Risk Runner 2, just to clarify, there is an SMG, but you can really just call those high rate of fire auto rifles. Which is, I had this discussion with one of my clanmates before we knew that SMGs were going to be in Destiny 2, and I was just like, I don't understand why they would put them in or what they would be. They're literally in Destiny 1, they're just... that the high rate of fire auto rifles are essentially just submachine guns. They're just super short range, super high rate of fire bullet hoses. That's what an SMG is.
I think they wanted to give them a special design, like a special aesthetic look to them, and call them something different.
Which is fine. To a certain extent, a sidearm is just a super high rate of fire hand cannon. So I guess who am I to complain? If they want to break them out into their own thing, that's fine. And AR can then be more like more like perhaps a military auto rifle, where it's not necessarily something that you're going to use right up in somebody's face, but you're also not necessarily going to use it in extreme long range.
Yeah,
standard combat range type weapon.
I wouldn't be surprised if SMGs got some type of buff to them. Their time to kill is actually very quick. But that damage fall off is also equally quick.
Yep.
So SMGs I found tore up at close range against people who would let me close, and good players almost never let me close. I didn't feel like they had any usefulness outside of that, which I understand. It's an SMG. It's supposed to be, a close range killer, and that's it. I just felt that maybe a small stability buff would be possibly in order, perhaps 1 point of damage, just to make it take one less shot or something like that, or to make that damage fall off maybe a couple meters out farther. Like I said, I don't want to go overboard. I don't want SMGs to be all-purpose guns. I just felt like what I had imagined was an SMG goes right up to an auto rifle range, and then auto rifles take over. I felt like there was kind of a gap in between those. I felt like SMGs were only good, really good out to 5 meters. And then auto rifles really took over at 10 or something like that. I thought there was a little window in there. Maybe it wasn't even like that. Maybe it was up to 5 meters, and then auto rifles were 7 and out. I felt there was a little couple meter window in there that SMGs could have been a tiny bit more useful. I found myself getting into an engagement thinking, oh, I'm going to tear this dude up, and hitting for 2 or 3 points less than optimal damage. I was like, really? He's I feel like I could reach out and poke him, and my auto rifle is tickling him like it's a feather gun, or my submachine gun. Sorry.
Gonna be a struggle to adapt to that new weapon type.
Yeah.
I mean, I hear what you're saying. The drop off was really punishing. I feel like right now, the SMG is kind of filling the role that the shotgun filled when it was a special weapon. It's something that is kind of in there for the people who just like to push right up into somebody's face. And this kind of goes for the sidearm as well, right? You have to be right up on top of somebody to get max damage out of a sidearm. Effectively, in kind of melee range. And I think the nice thing about that is because melees now are doing, significantly less damage than they were. It's taking 3 standard melees, I should say, to kill an enemy. Something I noticed in the beta is that it takes there's a brief delay when you melee somebody and go back to ready a weapon to be able to fire. And that delay, if you're not expecting it, because it was definitely something that felt different. I think there's a delay in Destiny 1 as well right there. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it felt noticeably longer in Destiny 2. You melee and then you take a breath,
Yeah.
take a breath. Okay, now I can shoot my gun again. And that got me killed a couple of times early on, but I found, these weapons comboed really well. It was kind of like a shotgun melee, but you just had to pull the trigger a few more times to get those rapid kills. So I feel like they were kind of different, variations on filling that hyper aggressive role, whether that's going to be a valuable role that's going to get playtime in Destiny 2. I don't know. I felt like pushing that close on somebody was really challenging, and really risky, really high risk as well. So
Yeah, especially with lower mobility. I mean, it's much harder to actually close that distance. You can't Titan Skate, you can't Warlock Surf. There's no Bones of Yao for hunters. I found it was very difficult because as soon as you round a corner, if there's more than one person there, your team shot down and you're basically gone. So, to summarize, I think SMGs could use a tiny, tiny buff. Very, very minute. We'll call it, 1 damage point or a little bit better stability or a little bit better damage fall off, not all three. I think auto rifles were in a great place. I know some people think they need a nerf. I disagree. I thought they were excellent at close range and not great outside of that.
Agree. Yeah.
Pulse rifles, I think, are in a good place. Hand cannons could use a small buff. Scout rifles, I didn't think scouts were great for the beta. I think when we get Vostok and maps like that, I think scouts are going to be just fine. I purposely made myself play with Does Not Compute and Black Scorpion a number of times to see if I could alter my playstyle, not in a way that I was necessarily trying to win, but just to see if I found myself some longer sight lines, if I felt like the guns felt good, and they did. It obviously takes a decent amount of shots to win, but I felt like they played very nicely when I could get myself into situations. Now, those situations on the maps we were given weren't necessarily beneficial for my team, but, that's part of the joy of having a bunch of different maps, is some of the maps are going to be better for long range, some will be better for close range. I think scouts will probably be fine. I would maybe up their damage a tiny bit to make them more forgiving. And what we have to remember here is there are actually multiple ways to buff a gun. You can buff the damage of a gun without decreasing the time to kill. You can just make it require a smaller percentage of headshots to kill, right? And I'm a huge fan of buffing and nerfing guns by doing that, because you don't change how fast the weapon kills, which is what a lot of people notice. You just change how difficult it is to get that optimal time to kill. I think hand cannons could use a small buff like that. Same time to kill, a little bit easier. I think scouts could do the same thing, but I'm okay with withholding judgment on that until we get to play them on maps that are designed with longer range engagements in mind.
So my my predictions along these lines here. I think, again, like you said, I'll kind of roll through maybe backwards from the way you did it there. Scouts, I think, felt fine to me as is. If anything, like you said, a small buff that makes the optimal time to kill a little bit easier would be the only thing that I would consider changing. Anything above and beyond that, I think, would be too much. I played with the scouts a lot in control. In that mid lane, and then also shooting from elbow or portal onto B, I found them to be very effective in that range. Unfortunately, of course, a lot of times I was still in range of the pulse rifles. So a little bit more distance would have given me a solid edge, but as it was kind of 50-50 if I went up against the pulse. But any other weapon, the scout dominated in those lanes for me, from my experience. Autos, hand cannons, everything else just got wrecked. So I felt like they were really good. They were also good for making people retreat from those longer sight lines. Pulses, I think, felt fantastic. I hope Bungie leaves them alone. I don't think that they felt overpowered, although Kill Clip certainly was a very strong perk.
I loved it. That was my favorite gun for exactly that reason. Nightshade with Kill Clip,
yeah,
so brutal.
Yeah, extremely powerful perk, especially again on control. I got first and second blood a few times because I would just push mid hard. If you beat the other team there, they run out into that mid thinking, oh, they're gonna shoot you. Kill the first guy because you get the first shot, right? And then Destiny 2, from what we've seen, that decides who wins a gunfight if neither of you moves. You reload and the next guy does not have a chance. You're going to kill him way faster than he can kill you. So it was kind of an easy 1-2 kill. And in a lot of situations like that. Very powerful. So I wonder if we'll see some perk adjustments, but I don't think they'll adjust the guns.
I hope not, because I liked having kill clip because it gave me a way to take down multiple opponents, which is something that I thought Destiny 2 was lacking. In Destiny 1, it wasn't easy, but it was possible for one person to kill 2 opposing players. In Destiny 2, it's very, very difficult without some exceptional movement on the ability of the player who's outnumbered. Kill clip, I found, gave me the ability to engage multiple players simultaneously. I had to be smart about it, but I could do it. I felt confident in that ability if I played the engagement correctly.
Right.
That being said, I like the fact that it illuminates the gun so brightly because I could see when an opposing player would have kill clip active, and I would duck behind cover for a second or two.
Yeah.
And I would purposely not engage. Simultaneously, I would very, very often time kill clips like the reload, because you have maybe a second and a half after you get a kill that you can reload, and then it starts kill clip, and then you've got like 3 or 4 seconds from there. So I would find myself delaying on the reload for a second instead of reloading immediately, reloading and like planning my engagements around kill clip, which I thought brought a whole new level to my gameplay that I very, very much enjoyed more than almost any other perk in the game. So I really hope they don't take that out. They don't nerf it too badly, although I think a nerf might be incoming. But perk-wise, I love the way it played.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't say that I didn't love it. I used it a lot, probably the most out of any weapon in the beta. But partly because of that, I feel like they probably, in their own playtesting, did the same thing and were like, yeah, this might be a little bit stronger than basically any other primary weapon. At least in the right situation, right? Like I was able to take people out if I pushed in close. Those pulses are a little harder to play up close. But it definitely was situational, and there's a lot of mid-range engagements that pulses can shine in, so it was a strong gun. So again, I think if they do anything to pulses, I think they might make a small adjustment to the effectiveness of that perk. Hopefully they'll still allow it to increase time to kill, but maybe just make it a little bit less forgiving. It felt very forgiving to me.
Oh yeah, it was. I mean, it was doing 28 per headshot, 19 per body shot. I think it easily brought it down into the 3 burst kill range, which makes it, 0.87 seconds, which is a fast Destiny 1 time to kill.
Yeah.
It's Hawksaw time to kill. And it was incredibly fast compared to Destiny 2 times. So that's primaries, except for sidearms. Sidearms, I know people are going to hate this. See, here's what happens. I think so many people hate sidearms right now and the way they're played in Destiny 1 that Bungie is almost a little bit afraid to make them even close to decent for the fear that it will cause salt and toxicity. Like, at this point in time, there aren't going to be too many people who are upset if sidearms just straight up suck when Destiny 2 is released. Like, they're so universally reviled in the competitive community right now and in the PvP community in general. Nobody would really be upset if they were just off. That being said, I felt that they were exceptionally underwhelming, like way, way underpowered. And it could be that we've just got 2 of the low impact archetypes on display. And in my opinion, low impact sidearms have always been horrendous ever since they introduced them. But I was very underwhelmed by sidearms. They were one of the only guns that I would unilaterally across the board say were not really fun to play with.
So I was 50-50 on sidearms. And I guess I kind of already talked about my opinions on handkins and auto rifles. So just to reiterate, I would leave autos alone. Hand cannons, I probably would not change except for, like you said, maybe a tiny damage buff, if anything. I think they'll leave them alone at launch and maybe adjust them up down the road. SMGs, I probably would. I mean, they could maybe they were very difficult to control, so maybe a tiny boost to stability would be the only thing I'd be looking at there. Sidearms, I was really 50-50 on. The Urchin I just found so punishing to use, and part of that is it was a faster time to kill, but it required all crits to obtain the optimal time to kill, which frankly, like, for me, does not make any sense. Like, I've always kind of felt like sidearms should more or less just be like fusion rifles and just do like 1 damage number per shot, like not even reward critical shots at all. Because all your like the whole point of a sidearm is that you're gonna whip it out at super close range and spam the trigger. So why are we rewarding precision shooting for a weapon that is not a precision weapon? I mean, the crit and the body damage are fairly close together on the two that we saw, but I'd say, almost like bring the body damage up, the crit damage either leave alone or I would almost say bring down, and like just make it more about just, if you land a couple of shots, you get a slightly faster time to kill. And if you just hit all bodies, then that's fine. That to me has always been what sidearms have been about, and that's why the mid impact and the high impacts in Destiny 1 are the only ones anyone uses, because you only need to land one, and if you can land 4 shots in a row, you got a pretty fair chance one of them is going to be a crit. So these ones were very punishing. The needle I was able to use successfully, essentially like I talked about before, as something that I could fire 3 or 4 shots and then finish with a melee, where I was just taking the body shots. I was just trying to burn somebody's shield down so I could punch him to death, and just using that essentially when I was running either the Nurgle or the Nightshade. Now I forget which one I was comboing it with. I guess it would have been the Nurgle, I think. So I was using that as my primary weapon and just using that for 90% of engagements. And if somebody tried to rush me, then I would just punish them with the needle, because it's faster than meleeing somebody to death. But but only just.
Now that you can't double melee, yeah, it might be a little bit faster. But I just found that I was better off using an auto rifle or literally anything, just backpedaling. Like I never found myself going up against an engagement with someone with a sidearm, regardless of what weapon I had in my hands, and thinking, oh crap, he's got a sidearm. No. I was like, oh, he's got a sidearm. I was like, okay, well, this is a win. And like 90% of the time it was. I was just a little disappointed with him. And I've never been one of those people who absolutely hate sidearms. I think that the way they modified them with the ammo was an unfair way to promote sidearm usage. I thought sidearms were a fun niche weapon, and that's probably what they needed to be. But the thing is, sidearms were always effective. They were never dominant. They were never great. They were always effective. The only reason they're so popular now in D1 is because of the ammo. That is literally the only reason.
And I think really people overemphasize that advantage in some cases.
No, they do, but it's nice now that shotguns are much less, meta. Before, it was much more difficult to use a sidearm because shotguns had ammo too. Now that shotguns don't have ammo, it's much easier to use a sidearm, and I think they've kind of gotten blown out of proportion. And once a few streamers start running one loadout, every other sweaty player who watches them copies it, and then everybody in trials is using it, and then it filters down into the Crucible. And regardless of if it's even the best weapon choice to use, once popular people start using it, it just it flows. Basically, that's what happens. Everybody gets involved with it. Like I can literally tell when a popular streamer uses an off meta gun, because usage numbers for that gun will surge over the next week. Like, there was a streamer who used Dreg's Promise a while back, and all of a sudden, 6 games in a row, at least one person was using Dreg's Promise, which nobody ever uses other than that. It was like, oh, I wonder what streamer is using Dreg's Promise this weekend. Yeah. Because, they probably went to the Lighthouse with Dreg's Promise, and now a bunch of other people are like, oh, I'm going to try out that gun. It looks good. And, it's just, that's the way it works.
Still a potato, but, I mean, if you're good at the game, it doesn't really matter as much what you use. Anyway, I don't know if we meant to get onto a groupthink talk, but there's certainly a lot of groupthink that goes on, which is fine. That's how everything. I mean,
we
is.
Contribute to it too.
Yeah,
we contribute to it with the weapon stat spreadsheet and stuff like that.
Yeah, we're part of the system. Yeah. Everybody's part of the system. That's okay. So yeah, I think that sidearms really should get pushed into a place where at most you're required to hit like 50-50 crits and bodies. Like how hand cannons are right now in Destiny 2, at least how they were in the beta. If it was 3 crits, 3 bodies for a sidearm, I wouldn't feel like it was out of reach. I would feel like it was challenging perhaps. But like, I'm not going to try to land 6 crits in the optimal time with the Urchin. Like, it's not going to happen, so why even bother? And I'm not even really going to try very hard to land 4 crits with the needle, because it's like, maybe I could get that, but not at optimal rate of fire. And then what's the point? I might as well just spam bodies. So it's just a little too demanding for it to really feel rewarding.
What I've always felt is, don't put something in the game that is possible to achieve but requires mostly luck. Because what's the point then? It was like when you could 2 headshot with the last word. It was like, why would you put that in the game? Because if I get 2 headshot with the last word, I didn't get outplayed by that person. That person just got 2 lucky headshots when they were firing from the hip. And being better at using the last word does improve your chances, but it comes down to luck. That gun should never have been able to kill in 2 headshots because it didn't take skill to make it happen for the most part. Although skill improved chances, it took luck. With sidearms, and it was the reason people hated Bloom and Halo Reach, but we'll get to that in a second. With sidearms,
never talked about that before.
Why make them able to have an optimal kill that takes 6 critical shots?
Yeah.
Nobody is ever going to get 6 critical shots in that optimal time to kill.
No.
And if they do, it was purely luck. Like, they didn't do it on purpose. There's no way, because if in order for you to get 6 headshots with a sidearm, you would have to pace your shots, which means you then won't get the optimal time to kill.
Yeah.
So why even bother putting it in the game? Because the only people who are going to get it are people who are spamming and got lucky once in a while. And you know what that means? They didn't outplay the other player. The other player just got unlucky, and it makes the player who got unlucky feel bad, and it doesn't make the player who did it feel rewarded because they didn't do anything to really get it.
They probably don't even know what happened.
It's always been to me that if a gun can do something, it needs to be realistic. Like with Halo Reach, what pro players realize at Halo Reach is that you were better off spamming the trigger and letting the bloom just go out as wide as it possibly could, because it would be faster to spam shots and get lucky and have almost all of them hit than it would be to pace yourself and actually hit your 5 shots correctly. It was faster to spam the trigger. But then what happened was some people would get lucky and hit all 5 shots and kill insanely fast. Other people would get unlucky and miss a shot and die to the other person who got lucky. Their aims were both true, but one person got lucky and one person didn't because of bloom. Putting something into the game that you have no control over is extremely, extremely unfun. It is a non-fun mechanic. That's why people hate damage over time. Because damage over time is something that happens to you, and then you have to sit there and watch it continue to happen. There is nothing you can do about it, which is an unfun mechanic. All right, so how do you work around that? In my opinion, you make something to where if it's in the game, it is achievable with skill. So for me, like, that's why I hated bloom on hand cannons. Why can't I fire the gun this fast if you're going to make my shots inaccurate? If you don't want me to fire that fast, why don't you just slow down the rate of fire? To me, that made sense. That way I can fire as fast as the gun allows and I'm not punished for it. Why do you allow a gun to fire this fast and then punish someone for firing that fast?
Yeah, that's one of those things that I think, there's a line between what is possible in the real world. Like, yes, you can fire a gun so fast that it's very difficult for you to aim, and a lot of your bullets just kind of go out randomly. But we're not in the real world. We're in a video game world trying to do something that's fun. And it's really not fun to be, the guys in Pulp Fiction who spray the wall and then get killed. Like, that's not a fun thing to be. So you want to be Samuel Jackson in that analogy. You don't want to be or John Travolta. You don't want to be the other guys. So
the dude from the back.
Yeah. So it's I agree. It's kind of a thing that's just it's not fun. It doesn't contribute to the game, and the point is not to simulate reality. Like, we're undead space magic wielding super soldiers. Like, let's not get hung up on, well, in the real world that's how a gun works. Like, we have fusion rifles. Like, in the real world that's not how fusion works. So I'm not gonna hang up if they wanna change the way that a friggin' hand cannon works and make it unrealistic but more fun. That's cool. So
Yeah, well, I think we've covered weapons pretty well. So, if the game were to come out with the changes we've discussed, autos basically the same, scouts, pulse rifles basically the same, maybe a tiny buff to scouts, we'll see. But we'll say autos the same, small, very, very small buff to SMGs and hand cannons, buff to sidearms, nerf to fusions, we'll call it a buff to rocket launchers, ammo buff to linear fusions. Snipers stay the same, but we have high impact. Shotguns stay the same. Grenade launchers, maybe a small buff. What's the game looking like to you? What's the PvP meta shaping out to be, do you think?
So if everything happens as we predict there, I think in the first week or so of PvP, maybe the first 2 weeks, I guess. Let's not try to get too crazy. I think we're going to see a lot of people, probably the majority of players, rolling with either a pulse or an auto as their sort of like main primary. And I say that because assuming that Destiny or that Bungie kind of follows their current design philosophy of designing these smaller, tighter maps with tighter encounters, there are going to be a lot of mid-range and short-range encounters. And then I think we're going to see a lot of people probably running submachine guns or a hand cannon as their sort of secondary primary, depending on their playstyle. So I think we're probably, if hand cannons get a small buff, I think we'll see more hand cannons at the higher end of the skill spectrum, and more auto rifles toward the lower end. And that would be my prediction right there.
Yeah, it's nice that we get the two primary meta now, that we don't have to singularly focus on one, because it makes it you basically have a lot more choices. You don't have to worry about, well, I picked this gun, so now I can't have another one. And I appreciate that. I'm thinking probably pulse hand cannon is going to be the main go-to for most competitive players on most competitive maps. I have a feeling the competitive maps are not going to be the biggest ones that are available to us. For the most part, they're either going to be things like not countdown. Why did I say countdown? Because I got Halo Reach on the brain right now, and because I'm thinking of the map and the game type. For countdown, they're going to be those asymmetric maps that are designed expressly for that will allow for both types of combat, but will kind of end up favoring the close range stuff more, simply because better players play aggressively a lot of the time, and they're more likely to get up in your face. I can see pulse rifle, auto rifle, or maybe pulse rifle, hand cannon being pretty powerful on the majority of competitive maps. For power weapons, I see shotgun and sniper are probably going to be the two most versatile. I mean, rocket launcher is great for game types like Countdown, where you eliminate one person and you immediately have a huge advantage, because it's, you get one kill, you knock them out, and then you've immediately got a 4v3 and you're good to go. But for any game type that's got, respawns, I don't think it's really worthwhile to use one of those. I think shotguns or snipers, more ammo. I don't think fusions are going to be as good. I don't think you're going to be able to pick it up and wipe a team with it. If you can, that's a huge mistake. Because nobody likes to come up against a gun and see it and think, well, I'm dead, and then have a half second to realize while they charge up that it doesn't matter how fast you shoot, you can't kill them. So yeah, I'm thinking probably pulse hand cannon meta to start out. Autos are going to be extremely competitive in non-competitive game types, where you don't have people using cover as advantageously as they could. Scouts, I'm going to withhold judgment right now. Scouts have never really been meta, with the exception of Mida. So I can kind of see that continuing. People's habits are very hard to break. They've kind of got this idea in their head. And unless scouts are just like way overpowered, I think it's going to be hard to swing a huge portion of the population into using them, especially because they so heavily reward critical shots and so heavily punish missing. So yeah, I think pulse hand cannon, shoddy snipe for power is how the meta would shape out. Even if they buff SMGs, I don't see them being heavily used at high levels. Sidearms, same way. So I think it's going to shape out relatively like the beta, but it's going to be more fun to play with some of those weapons who may have been underutilized, or maybe a little bit more rewarding.
Yeah, as far as the higher skill end of the meta goes, I would totally agree with you. We're going to probably see a lot of Pulse Hand Cannon play because both weapons allow you to take advantage of cover in the ways that really you should, especially in Destiny 2. They're both great for team shooting as well and for cleaning up kills because they do a lot of damage in a short amount of time. I think, though, we are going to see, especially in the quick play, non-competitive playlist, I think we're going to see a lot of people running like auto rifle SMG, partly because the two guns play the same, so you don't have to. You can sort of handle every encounter the same, and you just have to decide how far away is this guy. So I think we're probably going to see a lot of both of those two weapon types, probably intermixed with pulse rifles and hand cannons. So I think that's something to be aware of. I don't know yet, obviously, if that's something I'm going to recommend people do, but I think you probably want to anticipate in the non-competitive playlists that you're going to see a lot of people using those weapons, and so be aware of that and expect to see that. I think very few people will use sidearms just because so many Destiny veterans are sick of them. I'm not really upset by them one way or the other, but I definitely understand where people are coming from. There's a lot of sidearms, and it's kind of tiresome to see them all the time. So I get it. And I agree with you on scouts as well. I think scouts are going to remain a niche weapon that a smaller number of players use, and I think they'll be very effective in the right hands on the right maps and probably not very effective anywhere else.
Yeah, that's oftentimes how scouts are. Coming from a long-time scout rifle main user, it's a struggle on the smaller maps. So weapon-wise, we've pretty much covered it. And like we said, we obviously want to stress that's theory crafting. It's what it is. It's a mental exercise where you think about changes made to guns. You think about how it affects the playing field, how it affects the Crucible as a whole. You think about what type of things go into making a meta. We try to discuss it, but obviously it is just for fun. It's not for serious. We don't know these things are going to be yet. That's just where we assume Bungie's going to take the game. And we're very likely wrong on a lot of things. Yep. We've been wrong before when we've talked about the patch notes. But there is one more thing I want to cover before we run out of time.
Sure.
And it's something I've seen a lot of discussion about on the Destiny in the Game subreddit so far. It's the changes to mobility, recovery, and resilience, which obviously used to be agility, armor, and recovery. And, now they changed mobility and everything like that. So armor in this game, now called resilience, actually makes a pretty sizable difference. Not necessarily in time to kill, although there are time to kill differences. Mostly in terms of how forgiving, how easy it is to get optimal times to kill against your opponent or against yourself, depending on your your resilience. That is a side effect of the guns all doing less damage. There are a large portion of guns that are sitting right at the damage cutoff numbers for certain armor levels. Whereas in Destiny 1, there was like a huge armor jump where you could survive a trip mine, and then a huge armor jump where you could survive 8 headshots from a Hawksaw and 1 headshot and 2 bodies from mid-impact hand cannons. And that was like basically it. So anywhere between like 3 and 9 armor, you were like pretty much good to go. You were going to survive most stuff. In Destiny 2, your survivability drastically changes between the armor levels. And it's because, like I said, so many guns are just right at that level. Like they're doing 100 and 86 damage. There's a lot of guns that do 186 damage. So if you even have 1 armor, you can now survive a lot of what those weapons could normally kill you with. But then they do like 188 damage or 192 damage or 196 damage. So there are a lot of different ways that you can change your survivability with armor. So don't think that you can just lock and load at 1 armor level and be good to go. Similarly, recovery is obviously much, much slower in this game. It takes a lot longer to get your shields back. It takes a lot longer to get your health back. And I noticed that the differences between 0 recovery and, high recoveries were pretty noticeable. Same thing with mobility. Mobility, a lot of people have been sleeping on saying, oh, it doesn't do that much. If you played a low mobility build and then a high mobility build, it did a lot. It did a ton. I found it very, very easy to run quickly around the map at 10 mobility. And when I switched over to 3 mobility, I noticed a drop off on it. I have not done the testing. I will admit it could be a placebo effect. I have not done the testing to actually see how much it changes walking speed, sprinting speed, jumping height, any of those things. But I thought I felt an extremely noticeable difference between low mobility and high mobility. And I think combined, this is a good thing. They're making it worthwhile to have these trade-offs. High resilience means a lot. High mobility means a lot. High recovery means a lot. So which one of those do you want to sacrifice to get the other 2 high? Or do you want to go even across the board to all 3, right? For the first time, I feel like I actually have to make a choice when I'm looking at my build. And I'm really, really excited for that. I hope they don't change that in a negative way to make those have less of a difference.
Yeah, fantastic points. And I know, I've seen a little bit of the numbers on how those things kind of work out. And obviously we don't have firm numbers on like the effects of agility yet, and we don't have everything timed out. But it definitely felt like it made a difference. I really noticed it when I was switching between classes, going from one class to the next, just because the base armor, going from playing a hunter with the base armor to playing a titan with the base armor, I definitely felt the difference in resilience there. It just felt like, in the 1v1s, it felt like I didn't die quite as often. So I think it's a good thing. Like you said, this is something that I felt like Destiny 1 really lacked any kind of a meaningful decision. I know there are people who swear by high agility in Destiny 1, and I just, from the actual raw numbers, like in Destiny 1, basically playing with Mida is the only thing that actually makes like a meaningful overall difference in your agility in the game. Like you can max it out, but you're making such a huge sacrifice in your vulnerability by not running max armor, max recovery. So it was just kind of that, if you were a good player, you were a good player. If you weren't, you weren't, and it it was kind of one optimal build. So I'm really happy, like you said, really, really happy that we're gonna have to think about it a little harder.